Ladies and gentlemen, can we settle down? We have, as always, a sterling panel. I'm Steve Erlanger from the New York Times. I won't introduce everyone. You can see their names, you can Google them, and you know who they are anyway. Certainly this group does. I was thinking about this idea of order and no order. I always think we're a little bit blind to our own recent past. We keep talking about the fact that there was an order. Well, there was sort of an order, but always underneath that order was fear and violence and repression, and a lot of wars in the rest of the world that were proxy wars, and a lot of gray zones. And I was remembering, partly because of the title of this conference, in '92, I came from Moscow to interview Lennart Meri. And the first thing I did was go to Narva, which was snowing. It looked like revolutionary Petersburg. Lots of very angry Russian speakers. And
why do you look at me?
No, I'm not. How can I not look at you? No, lots of very angry Russian speakers and real issues about minority rights, because the old Estonian constitution, which immediately went into effect from 1930, whatever it was, wasn't really, wasn't very modern. And I came to talk to Lennart Meri, who was described to me in his rather dry, elegant way, growing up being unable to go to the sea, about the deportations, about the areas of Estonia that were banned. And this was before NATO, right? So Estonia was a gray zone, let's be honest. And at the end, he asked me, because I was this young guy from the New York Times, if Russia invaded us, what would the US do? And I thought for a second, first of all, it was meant to flatter me, and it sort of worked. And I said, nothing. There'd be sanctions. And he said, that's what I think too. So I think about this when we think about Ukraine, when we think about a different Russia. And I think this is a good way of starting this panel, because there's a challenge in front of all of us, a challenge in front of Europe. The initial description of this talks about how Russia has upended this order. Well, America's upending it too. So we should talk about that as well. The notion of the benign empire, which in America we think of as altruism, that's changed. It's not altruism anymore. It's MAGA. It's American interests. So everyone has to cope with these things, and we have a good panel to do so. And given I have here, at our pleasure, the former head of this country, Kaja Kallas, let's begin with you.
Yes. Well, thank you, and it's great to be here. It seems like a very long time ago when I was Prime Minister of this country, although it wasn't actually that long time. It just so much is happening right now, and I mean, like the saying is, your where you stand depends on where you sit. So now I have a new position, so I make a few observations from this point. I agree with you that this is beginning of one new area and the end of another. We see these tectonic changes happening in the world, and Russia's aggression against Ukraine, of course, is really what we see. But we also see the tectonic shift, and there I want to really focus on what President Xi said to President Putin in 2023. He said that the changes not seen in 100 years are led by us together. And when I'm talking to, the Central Asia countries or the Western Balkans, the approach that the Chinese and the Russians are making to them is like, you see, there is a change, and you know, we are the ones who have the power, so you should be with us. And I think this is something that we have to keep in mind. It means that the rules-based international order, the UN Charter, where it is clearly stated that you can't attack another country, this is really under attack. The institutions are under fire in different parts of the world. Cooperation is out, competition is in, and this is something where democracy is becoming a collateral damage. And I think this is extremely dangerous for us all. Europe's reaction is like the psychiatrist said, the 5 stages of grief. You have denial, you have the anger, you have bargaining, depression, and acceptance. When it comes to our relations with our biggest ally, I think we are in acceptance now, and but that doesn't mean giving up. I mean, there's a difference there. We are definitely working that this international order really stays in place, but we also need to develop it further. Now, my second observation, that it only means that we need more, not less, Europe in foreign policy. And why I say this is that I see, the countries around the world turning to us because we are the credible, we are the reliable partner, we are the predictable partner right now. So there's also a chance for Europe to grow its geopolitical power. And also, more important, European citizens want it. So the latest Eurobarometer, 66% want a greater role for the EU in protecting them against global crises and security risks. And 9 out of 10, 89%, want the EU member states to be more united in facing global challenges. So third observation, of course, it doesn't work perfectly. So what we have to do is make it better. We need to make ourselves stronger when it comes to military. I think we are doing already more, but not enough. That is clear. We also need to look how we do things in Europe in order to be more agile. I think we are working on that. We have the coalitions of the willing. We have different formats, but we also need to make the decisions really faster on the European level. And coalitions of the willing are not sustainable in replacing the European Union. And when our adversaries or our partners, for that matter, also want to divide us, then we have to keep in mind why they want to divide us. It is because we are weaker when we are all acting separately. We are stronger when we are together. That's why they don't like the European Union. And that's what we have to keep in mind. And then of course, when it comes to Ukraine, we need to also use the Q word, which means the qualified majority issue. And again, I'm stressing that where you stand depends on where you sit. So you know that Estonia has been always against the qualified majority because for 50 years we didn't have a voice, and we really cherish that we have a voice now. And then my fourth and final observation is that don't forget about the Europe's power of seduction. I mean, Harvard political scientist who unfortunately passed away last week, John Nye, called it soft power. I think this is something that we see. Again, what I'm saying, that I've traveled in this job to 25 different countries, and there are a lot of countries coming to Europe to meet us. And we are not only known for trade and regulatory superpower, our force of attraction is our way of life. And this is actually under attack right now, what I said in the beginning, by these autocratic powers, and that we have to keep in mind. It is our strategic commodity that we can play well if we play it strategically. Thank you.
Very good. Of course, the attraction of Europe is also bringing the political problem of the far right and migration to the fore. But as we talk about the new order, I just want to ask you, because it seems to me, and I don't know whether you accept this or not, but these efforts to form a coalition of the willing are a function of frustration with Brussels.
Yeah, it is
Wait.
true. It is true. No, but it is true. But President Ilves is saying that, it is one against others, very much so. So we need
Well,
to think.
one or two.
But what I
and
want
maybe
to,
soon
yes,
three.
what I want to say is that I mean, the coalitions of the willing. If you think in the past, there have been many good things growing out of the coalitions of the willing. If you think about Eurozone, first it was a coalition of the willing. If you think about Schengen, it was the coalition of the willing. So we can build on that. So if we want to move faster in certain cases, but I think keeping in mind that coalitions of the willing cannot substitute for the European Union, and again keeping in mind that we are stronger when we act together. But saying this, also we need to work on our decision-making processes.
Yes, this is your burden.
Yeah.
I wanted to turn to Jack next, because I think it'd be useful for this discussion to get a very sober look at the state of the Ukraine war, which is something Jack's been back and forth. He knows his military stuff. So I thought it would be useful here to get a kind of cold, neutral, or certainly not ministerial view of how the war is going. So, Jack, over to you.
A view without responsibility. In other
Yes,
words.
precisely.
Very good.
That's like journalism.
Exactly. Yeah, quite. So I think over the last year, we saw the Russians starting to build momentum towards the end of last year. They began to take more territory. And then the Ukrainians adapted. They worked out a system by which they could essentially attrit Russian forces as they approached the line of contact with fair reliability, such that Russian momentum slowed down. And so we saw the Russians, on the one hand, become more efficient in their ability to kill Ukrainian troops, more efficient in their use of artillery and fires and the coordination of those fires, but less capable of translating that into changes of terrain. Into their favor. Now, the challenge is that the Russians have realized they have a problem. They have been working out over the last couple of months how to target the UAV ecosystem, and in particular the operators on the Ukrainian side. And they are preparing for more large-scale offensive operations. There's been a lull while they have been trying to avoid suggesting to the US that they are the barrier to a ceasefire. So we've seen a reduction in Russian casualties and attacks over the last month, but they are also expanding their recruitment. They have exceeded their recruitment targets for every month this year so far. And therefore, we are likely to see, I think, once this phase of somewhat intense diplomacy is moved beyond that point, we will probably see large-scale offensive operations renew in order to try and maximize pressure on Kyiv and convince those that are supporting Kyiv that Russia can essentially get what it wants by military means. That is not assured. On the Ukrainian side, there is a realization that there are going to be a difficult few months ahead. This will cost Ukraine in lives. It will be difficult in terms of materiel, particularly when there's uncertainty about supply, and it will likely see territory ceded to the Russians. But that does not mean that the Ukrainians are any less determined to resist or that they will fail to hold. And actually, if we can get over this hurdle of the Russian offensive this summer, then the Russians will hit a point where they have depleted the stocks, for the most part, of their legacy equipment. They are therefore then dependent on what they can produce. And in many ways, they will have used up, should we say, the willing individuals who were prepared to come forward on the basis that the war might be over soon and large inducements to sign up as contractors was attractive. And so the Russians, if they want to similarly generate new forces going into next year, may have to use much more coercive means to bring people into the military. That does not mean that the Russians cannot keep fighting, but it means that the political costs and risks for the Russians increase. And the key point here that I would finish on is that we've been talking about sanctions and its effect on the Russians for some time. Whether or not those sanctions allow the Russians to keep going is about to be tested. Because as the Russians become dependent on their production rather than stockpiles, then they are more exposed to international supply chains. In fact, we observed one of the largest manufacturers of chromium in Russia, which is used to line artillery barrels, go bankrupt, representing about 20 to 23% of the chromium market in Russia a couple of months ago, and that was as a result of sanctions. So the point I would make here is that firstly, we need to do everything we can to increase the risks later this year for the Russians in continuing the conflict by being more vigilant on enforcement and disruption of their economy. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the fundamentals are in place so that we can continue to support Ukraine.
Great.
There is the will there, but Europe needs to make sure that there is a strong underlying supply chain for the industries that can keep Ukraine in the fight.
Because part of what has always bothered me, particularly over the last year, is we've had a lot of relatively optimistic views of the pressure on the Russian economy, on inflation, on production, on the difficulty of recruitment. And somehow those predictions have not come true. If they're building a lot of tanks, people say they've replaced quite a lot of what they've lost. They don't seem to be willing to stop. So that's one point just for us to talk about. But the other question I want to ask you is, the Ukrainians are buying landmines. I mean, can they create a defensive line that's going to hold? Because sometimes I think the best outcome for Ukraine would be no deal at all, but a ceasefire that lasts.
It's possible to build a defensive belt if you have enough equipment that is extremely difficult for the Russians to get through, right, and even harder for them to exploit if they do break through. The biggest limiting factor on that for the Ukrainians is their own ability to recruit, train, and equip personnel. And people usually focus on the recruitment bit. I would say most of the problems are everything that happens after that. Training and equipping. And actually, the recruitment piece is solvable, but there's no point dragging everyone out of the economy if you don't then have the capacity to make them useful troops.
Okay.
And so the Ukrainians are working on that problem, but that is the thing that the Russians look at, and that's what gives them optimism that they can still achieve their objectives. What they are hoping is that they can apply enough pressure along enough breadth of front that they will simply find gaps. We see that happening at the moment at a small scale. There was a Russian penetration not so long ago that got 12 kilometers behind the front line, for example. They just found a gap where there was no one there, right? They got killed. They didn't actually translate that into anything, but that's the risk. Okay. And so that's the problem the Ukrainians need to solve. We need to make sure they can be equipped.
Right, thank you. Baiba, you've done a lot of things. You've been in NATO too, deeply embedded. And so what I'd love, I mean, you'll say whatever you want to say, but if you could look a bit ahead.
What I can say.
No, of course. What you're willing to say, live and on television. But if you could look ahead a bit to the summit as well, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so NATO summit at the end of June. We just had informal ministerial in Antalya. You had the first panel, which analyzed that. And I must say I was relieved because it was a very business-like, informal discussion. And basically, it was not about what we need to do, but how we get there. And that's exactly what we need. And that's what our priority has been, because we have had 3 lines of effort, both with nationally, but also within NATO, which is make ourselves stronger. And that is both at the national level. It's not only defense spending, but also internal security services, resilience, across the board, defense industry, and so on and so forth. Make NATO stronger. And that is not only defense plans that we all have, but actually how to fill the force structure, how to fill the defense manning, the exercise, the resources, and most important, the capability targets, which actually, I mean, we have that discussion on the capability targets because, as Secure always reminds us, is I really don't care how you take out a tank whether you take it out by javelins or whether you take it out by the armed drones. At the end, you have to achieve the effect, okay? So, and that is what the discussion was about also at the NATO ministerial, you know, how we achieve those targets. But then, making NATO stronger, making EU stronger, and it's great to have Kaja as the head of the External Action Service and Vice President of the Commission, because concentrating the minds on the priorities within the EU is always a challenge, because everything otherwise becomes a priority. And now when you clearly have that defense and security angle in the EU much more prominent, that allows also for all the work streams sort of prioritize. So it's the EU in that respect is very important. And then the second pillar, the second line of effort, which is actually cheaper than the first, is weakening Russia and weakening and degrading Russian military capabilities. When we look at the national sort of level, we still believe it's the cheapest way to support Ukraine. It's the cheapest way to make us stronger. That does require quite a bit of sort of data to understand what Russia is doing. For example, currently the shadow oil export, so the oil export through the shadow fleet is 85% of Russia's oil exports. And that goes through the Baltic Sea. So, and that is more than a third of Russia's federal budget income. They finance war from the budget. The National Welfare Fund, Jack didn't speak about it, but the welfare fund will be gone by the end of the year. I mean, it's basically depleted. So it's a very direct way how to go after Russia's money from which it finances the war. Because again, getting those soldiers in the war, they are paid quite highly compared to other parts of the Russian economy. So there's a sort of logical sequence to everything. So denying Russia money, denying technology, and denying partnerships. And that's very much an international effort. That's what we do as diplomats. That's, you know, friendships that are ours, and weakening Russia's ability to use their partnerships to enable their war. So those three lines of efforts will remain also for NATO. And again, NATO is the strongest political military alliance in the world. It is a defense alliance. It is based on the UN Charter. Article 51, the same as Ukraine defends itself under. And supplying Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, for us is an absolute priority. 5% for defense, that is what is decided, but we also give about 1% of GDP across the country to Ukraine.
Well, this is what I wanted to just ask you about. I mean, political will is one thing, money is another thing. Last July in Washington, NATO agreed it would spend the same 40 billion on Ukraine that it had done the year before, but the Americans are not, there's no talk in Washington at all of another appropriation. We're running out of the 61 billion. Can the rest of NATO come up with another 20 billion, which is what the Americans were supposed to spend?
Well, actually, in accordance with what SecGen, Mark Rutte said, that we gave 50 billion, not just 40, that was agreed. So we gave more than sort of formally was required or agreed. But there is a lot that is also not visible. There is a lot of permits for exports that are given particular capabilities. There are lots of things that allies have that they don't want to be visible in public that they provide. Sure. Intel information doesn't cost much, but it's crucial for targeting. It's crucial for taking out those Russian capabilities that need to be taken out. So there is a variety of ways how to sort of continue supporting beyond passing of another bill.
Right.
And that's why, you know, we are all very actively working with the US colleagues, and it was great that Lindsey Graham was in Antalya also, together with Secretary Rubio. The big sanctions package that has been prepared is very realistic, and that is, some things that will further weaken Russia very substantially. So, but again, being rational, being clear about the priorities that we have, not going into emotions about particular type of statements or, sound bites or this and that, is just, keep working. Just
Okay. I do worry about fiscal
Kaja?
space.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say
Please.
the number. Yes, total it was 40 billion. I mean, European allies did 20 billion of that. And this year, European allies have already done 23 billion given to Ukraine. So, of course, the target is to give as much as we gave last year, but we have already, on the European level, done more this year, but we only have in May. But definitely we need to do more, considering that if the Americans are not chipping in with new money, we need to also find this. But we have the economic might. It actually doesn't require that much from all the member states.
and
If
Ukraine's own
everybody-
production is such
if everybody would do, what Netherlands is doing. I'm not even talking about Denmark or the Baltics or the Poland, but I'm talking about Netherlands, the level. Then actually, we can fill this gap.
Well, I hope so, being a slightly cynical journalist. If you're going to have 5% for
slightly
NATO,
cynical.
plus, no, I'm a big fan. But if you're going to ask for 5% of a budget, however you define the 5% for NATO,
Absolutely.
and you're going to give more money to Ukraine, which is separate money, and you have this new loan program from the EU, which is basically 150 billion, which is great, but it's not enough.
No, it's 800 billion altogether.
No, it
if you
isn't.
take,
I'm sorry.
If you take all the
It's
all
a
the
potential extra 600 billion if countries choose
Yes,
to
yes.
make their own fiscal deficits bigger. So that's not it's 150 for sure.
Yeah.
And then we'll see.
That's the-
I'm sorry, I don't want to be difficult, but it's important because the EU sells something that sometimes sounds better than it may.
But the
actually
fiscal
be.
space is important. Because it wasn't there. The rules were
No,
not
totally.
allowing this.
I agree.
And for many, it has been an obstacle. Why we have seen decisions from different member states. Spain last week, for example, saying that they are going to 2% now. Because it has been difficult because the fiscal space has been small. So I wouldn't undermine this either.
Okay, it's a creative idea and I like it. I just wish it were bigger.
Of course, we all wish it was bigger, but at the same time, and now I'm putting my previous hat.
Yeah.
In every state, you have all the issues. You have education, you have social affairs, you have all these issues. And of course, the military would say that 100% of the budget should go to the military, but it's not. You have to keep the society functioning and together. So this is also what we need to know, and you need to have the society on board. And we know that it is more difficult in some parts where the public opinion does not feel the threat so imminently than it is here.
Well, this is a big issue about political leadership, not so much in this part of the world, but in farther west, which is why the new German chancellor is promising. We'll see what happens. I've left Mihai for last. From Moldova, another kind of gray zone, where the winds of what's going on in Ukraine, in Washington, in Brussels, may seem stronger. So I wanted to turn to you to see how it's going and what you're thinking.
Well, thank you, but I would take issue with the label of a gray zone. The Republic of Moldova is a firm, determined candidate for joining the European Union.
Right.
Yes, we might have been a gray zone for a while. We've lost 3 decades. We have no more time to lose. And we are a determined candidate to join the European Union. And we're incredibly thankful for our European partners for reciprocating and supporting us in this path. What I would like to mention at the beginning is that the situation in which we find ourselves in nowadays on the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Act, when we are discussing territorial concessions, is not great, diplomatically speaking. And any territorial concession is a slippery slope to never-ending anxiety, never-ending harassment, and never-ending undermining of rule-based order. So it is a tragic reality, but a reality which we have to address. And we all look forward with optimism, because we cannot be pessimistic in our neck of the woods, to the discussions about peace in Ukraine. But it is a roller coaster, a never-ending roller coaster. One day you see a positive news and you are excited. The next day you see something that makes you a bit more depressed. But in the Republic of Moldova, in this past 3 years, over 3 years now, we have not only muddled through, but reached meaningful progress. We have diversified our energy supply, no longer dependent on Gazprom, which 5-10 years ago seemed impossible. Well, it is already the case. We have significantly consolidated our cyber defenses with the support of our partners. We are doing significant progress with the support of the European Union, with the European Peace Facility, and High Representative Kaja Kallas was in Chisinau recently announcing yet another package of support. But what really bothers me is when I hear back home some of the pro-Russian opposition questioning the assistance that we get from the European Union for defense. I can understand the guns and butter debate. That's a legitimate debate to be had. But when you are receiving grants to consolidate your defense, and you have supposed politicians who are promoters of national sovereignty and independence undermining those actions, that's borderline treasonous. And the fact that some of the same politicians playing to the Russian tune are advocating on maintaining this level of defenselessness of the Republic of Moldova, arguing that neutrality is a guarantee of security, which you don't have to be a strong expert in history to know that that is slightly problematic. But the cynicism is incredible, given that the only country that violates Moldova's neutrality is the Russian Federation, which has maintained troops and munitions on our territory despite our express position to have those withdrawn, and moreover, despite Russia's own international commitments under the OSCE summit in 1999. But our challenges, unlike those of Ukraine, which is facing with incredible courage and enormous sacrifice the wrath of Russian kinetic aggression, Moldova has the dubious honor of being the petri dish of Russian hybrid tactics and Russian disinformation. But we are making significant progress there as well with the support of our partners. We are more resilient, and call me biased, but we must have done something right if we managed to re-elect President Sandu last year, win the EU referendum in a very tough circumstances, albeit with a narrow margin. But as my friends keep telling me, a win is a win. And I've come around to
That's what Donald Trump says. A win is a win.
We concur in that position. And in fact, speaking of our American friends, we've received incredible support for our energy resilience, for our growing defense capabilities, and we very much look forward to continuing with that undertaking. But one last item, speaking of our upcoming parliamentary elections. The Kremlin has always tried to undermine our sovereignty and our security. They've often went to political proxies, to those pro-Russian politicians that I already mentioned. But at one point they realized that the money that they were giving them, given that how corrupt these politicians are, it surprised even the Russians. So they decided to now go to the heart of sovereignty, to those with whom the sovereignty is invested, the voters, the citizens. And the cynicism here is also shocking. You have these oligarchs who are fugitives from Moldovan justice, who are hiding in Russia, who are exploiting the very poverty that they've left behind. Because, nowadays we have very generous headlines from international media when it comes to Moldova. Small country with a big heart, in light of the incredible openness that we provided to Ukrainian refugees, and we welcome the largest number of refugees per capita. But international media was not always as generous to Moldova. We've had the billion-dollar fraud. We've had many other issues. But these very oligarchs involved in all these frauds, which have left Moldovans poorer, are now exploiting this very poverty to undermine the interest of these very citizens, that is, the European integration. But with all that being said, the Republic of Moldova is stronger and more resilient today than it was just a few years ago. Right. And this is a testament to the resilience of Moldovan society, but also the incredible support of our partners in Brussels and in member states and over the Atlantic. Right. And we cannot thank you enough for this support.
I remember being in Transnistria, interviewing Colonel Lebed of the Russian 9th Army, if I remember properly. 14th Army. And I said, well, why are you here? You have a whole country between you and Russia. And he looked at me and he said, well, I have a grandmother in Ukraine. And, you know, I mean, this is the mentality that still exists. So talk a little bit about the problem of Transnistria, I think, because it's not well understood.
Well, first of all, let's remind ourselves how General Lebed ended.
Why don't you tell them?
Epitomizing of the Russian reality back then and now. When it comes to the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, we've had a crisis, yet another one, this January, when it was the sole decision of the Kremlin to cut off the gas supply to this region. They can't do the same to the Republic of Moldova. They tried at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We were not broken, which what was the Russians' expectation, but they shut down the gas supply to the Transnistrian region. And it was the European Union that has come to the rescue. Voilà. And you can imagine how even some of the more pro-Russian folks on the ground there might have a bit of a soul-searching and coming to Jesus moment when they know that it is Kremlin that shut off the gas, and it is the European Union taxpayers that have come to the rescue. So things are moving there in a positive direction as well. The fact that together with Ukraine we control the border, for 30 years that has not been the case. Now this is a major game changer, right, as we control the border, Moldovan-Ukrainian border on the Transnistrian segment. The fact that we are diversifying energy supply, including on electricity, we're finalizing the high voltage line that will no longer make us dependent on the Kuchurgan power plant in the Transnistrian region. We would need a backup line, and we're working with our American partners to hopefully see that in place. And it's in the interest of our American friends for Moldova to be resilient, to become a transit country, which we are about to become, to help American investments both in Romania and Ukraine be able to transit the Republic of Moldova. Okay. But the Transnistrian region is stable, and we are going to keep it that way because we understand full well the difficulties, the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And I must say that some folks on the ground, or rather most folks on the ground, understand that as well.
Great.
And will continuously engage in good faith, including providing all the benefits of European integration to all of our citizens. Right. Because unlike the Kremlin, we care for our citizens, no matter the language they speak, no matter the region they live, no matter their political preferences. And we are firmly committed to engaging in good faith and bringing back the Transnistrian region into the Republic of Moldova in a peaceful fashion.
Thank you.
And European integration is a strong pull factor for that.
Great, great. I want to raise one more topic, and then I would like to go to the audience. So please do think about what you might want to ask. But the topic that I want to raise to everyone is the United States of America.
Surprise,
now,
surprise.
Surprise, surprise. We had the NATO ambassador, Mr. Whitaker, here yesterday. I don't know if he's still here. There was an interesting seminar. It was kind of like, some people regarded it as almost like a teaching moment. You know, I mean, people were explaining to Whitaker how things ought to run or how things were running. He seemed to say all the right things. I thought he said all the right things. The question I have for the panel is, do you believe it?
Listen, let me go first. I've been to the US since mid-December on various visits, I believe 5 times. You know, 2 of those together with 2 other Baltic ministers, so 3 of us together. We have had delegations of parliamentarians, we have had defense ministers visiting, because it's not about believing or not. We have interests. We have relationships that is very deep and very, very important to all of us. So just, thinking in those terms, whether it's, we like or not like certain statements, or whether, we become emotional about, believing or not, that's not the answer for the relationship. So if you want to have a relationship, you invest in it and you go as far as you can in that relationship. And that is what we are doing. So yes, I believe what Ambassador Whitaker said, and I also believe what Secretary Rubio was saying when we met as ministers, or when we met now in the NATO fora. It just doesn't mean sitting back, relaxing, and thinking that everybody will love Europeans. That's not going to happen. It's, there is a part of narrative in a certain part of the society in the US about Europeans being this or Europeans being that, and mixing together various Europeans. And, also that, Russia presents some type of alternative, ideal civilization. So, but without actively working and engaging and actually addressing those points and really making sure that you are there in that time and space, and that you have that policy that is important to you reflected in those conversations, nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. And you can't just, the same in the trade relationship. Commission is doing its work, members are doing, allies are doing their work. Within NATO, our militaries are working as close as ever, even closer. We have more US exercises this summer in the Baltics than we have had before, and it will continue. And let's look also at the facts. In the first Trump administration, we got the troops, we got the funding in the Baltics, in Europe, that had not been there before in Obama's administration. And that was despite all the rhetorics and everything. So steady on, keep working, keep working. I mean, invest in the relationship. And again, it's a different type of administration, it's a different type of reality in Washington. So adjusting to that reality, if you believe that relationship is important, that is what we do.
Right. Anyone else want to?
Well, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that while the Trump administration is slightly tactically chaotic, it is actually very, very consistent in the strategic prioritization that it articulates in this area. And a lot of the time, we don't like it, and therefore we find every excuse to pretend that we can divert them onto a different course. And their priorities, as articulated, are number one, reduce foreign spending, because they're concerned about the deficit. We might be slightly confused about how they go about bringing that down, but nonetheless, that's what they've articulated. The second is an absolute prioritization on preparing the US for confrontation with China. That is the DoD's priority. It has been for several administrations, but the timelines are looking very uncomfortable, and the correlation of forces in the Indo-Pacific is now looking very uncomfortable. And so that's leading to more tangible shifts. And the third is that I think Donald Trump personally quite likes doing business with the Russians. He quite likes the relationships he has. He wants a bilateral relationship. And he has concerns about, for example, the expiry of New START in February next year, and the appreciation that he wants to negotiate with the Russians bilaterally. And he sees some of these issues, which Europeans care about deeply, to be barriers to having that negotiation. And so if we treat that as the base case, then the real question, I think, is not so much whether we can radically alter US policy. The question is, how do they go about implementing this policy? Do they do it in a constructive way, where there is more burdens taken on by the Europeans, a managed process, should we say, or is it chaotic and fractious? And which of those it is, because one of them could be very damaging, that's where these relationships and investing in engagement is absolutely critical. I don't think we're going to get another major supplemental bill supporting Ukraine from the US. It might happen. We have to plan on the assumption that it is not going to happen. We would be mad to assume we can change that. We can try. But that is something that we can deal with. If, on the other hand, there is active hostility to the Ukrainians, leverage being applied against them to try and force them into a position which is unacceptable to them, unacceptable to us, that's a very different story. So we have to keep talking.
Right.
And
please.
also on China, I just want to say that, so I have to be careful because we are on the record, but I think Intel assessments are quite clear, and some of that are public, that on nuclear, both the warheads and delivery, China is progressing faster than we ever expected, and they will be on par with the US and Russia in 2030. So, and that's a big game changer. And that's a big game changer. 2030. That's at least the public part of the assessments that is there. 1-2 years later, it doesn't really change the picture. But the whole sort of relationship is different. If the US and Soviets have been involved in a variety of verification mechanisms, in a variety of exchanges throughout the years, for the decades and decades, has never happened with China.
No, that's
And China refuses to engage on that. We tried through NATO. We tried in a variety of So it's, and that's where the US clearly says to us, yes, we are very concerned, and this is where we also would like Europeans to be understandable. And this is also where the sort of friendships matter, also for the US.
No, it's true, because I mean, the Chinese always say we won't negotiate until we're at a par. And that's coming, as you say. And of course, the Americans need to spend more money on certain kinds of ships and certain kinds of defenses about Taiwan that we've been very lax about, let alone Greenland. Hey, there's always Greenland to talk about. I wanted to open this up. One of the things I must say that encouraged me about Ambassador Whitaker yesterday is he seemed quite open, but also he was very explicit about not leaving strategic gaps, even if the US begins to move troops, that it would take care not to leave holes in European defenses, because there's certain things that American troops do that Europeans haven't done, partly because the Americans kind of didn't want them to. And we'll see. So we have lots of questions, and
we also get women asking questions.
And I'm going to do my best. Yes, I'm first going to pick on Liana Fix, who's way in the back, and then we'll take like 3 or 4 questions. So
thanks so much.
Please identify yourself, so I don't have to do it, and
so much.
Ask a question. Thanks.
Thanks so much. My name is Liana Fix. I'm from the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. I want to follow up on the China question, but with a different spin to the High Representative. Jack Watling has just said that we have an opportunity in autumn to interrupt the supply lines that are going to Russia. What about the China supply line that is going to Russia? It seems that we are not speaking anymore at all about the fact that China is the main reason how Russia can reconstitute its military power. It's not on the radar of the administration, it seems, but it also seems as if Europe has dropped the issue too, since the United States is not talking about it anymore. Okay. And there's certainly no reason for anyone to assume that China's support for Russia would stop anytime soon. Right. So what's the European stance on that, especially given that we are now in talks about perhaps reviving the investment agreement and so on and so on?
Clar, Natalie, maybe.
So
identify yourself.
Natalie Tocci from Rome. So I also had actually a question for Kaja, for the High Representative. So Europe obviously faces, to me, 3 big threats. The first is the obvious one, which is the Russia threat. And it's so obvious that our immune system is kind of stronger. We know it, we're preparing for it, we're doing something about it. The second is to kind of, come back to the way Jack was putting it. It has to do with the US in the best of circumstances, a US benign indifference in the worst of circumstances, US hostility. But that is obviously a threat to the extent that our immune system is much weaker. And the threat third is what I would define as the J.D. Vance in reverse threat. So not the threat of these dangerous liberals, right. But rather the danger from within of far-right nationalist populist forces. And obviously there's a sort of triangle there. Now, that third threat gets us into the whole coalition of the willing and variable geometry sort of discussion. And I think you're right, Kaja, in saying that obviously it's not a substitute for the EU, and yet it's there because we have a problem. And you point to two models, but I think it's worth noting that they're actually quite different models, because you pointed to the Eurozone as a potential way to create a nexus and Schengen. It seems to me that the Eurozone model is not the model for defense, because that is something that is born from within, as opposed to the Schengen model, which is something which is born from outside, and then eventually it's imported in. And so I think as far as defense is concerned, that second model is probably a far more appropriate one to look into. But it creates an issue for you to...
The question.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
No, but get there faster, because there are a lot of people who want to talk.
So basically, how do you create that connection now?
Okay. Mr. Landsbergis, and again, I know, but please identify yourself anyway.
Thank you so much, Gabrielus Landsbergis from Lithuania. There are so many words that are being spoken throughout the different panels about the need for cooperation and the prospects and actually the explanation as to how to rationalize the current US administration, and it's all very good. But there are some things that actually we see where the cooperation is already different, and that is defense spending. Clearly Europe is awakening, and as Minister Sikorski yesterday clearly said that Europe is awakening into some sort of a defense giant. But we hear frustrations on the Washington side when it comes to defense spending, meaning that there is an unforeseen consequence of when you awaken the giant is going to spend on itself rather than to go shopping abroad. And when we talk about it, why we're not going to spend, and most of the money is actually already being allocated to European industries, I usually talk about trust. Because the trust is an issue. If you kick Europe, hard enough, most likely there will be repercussions. So my question maybe to Kaja would be, what it would take from the American side to start rebuilding and regaining the trust that has been lost during the last 4 or 5 months.
Those are all important questions. And Francois Heisbourg, and then we'll come back to the panel, and then we'll have another round of questions.
Thank you, Steve. My question is about ourselves.
This is Francois Heisbourg. Identify yourself, please.
From the IISS
Who doesn't know
London
Francois?
and the FRS in Paris. Question is the following, and it's to Kaja Kallas. We are going to have lots of claims for money. Money for the defense budget increases necessary. More money for Ukraine, and we have electorates which are rather unruly these days with the rise of populism and so on. If you're looking for money, there are 250 billion euro lying around in Brussels under Euroclear custody, frozen Russian assets. I understand that legally it's possible to use these as collateral for helping Ukraine. This would easily fund the equipment purchases that we need to do in the absence of the Americans. I agree with Jack in his dire assessment on the Americans going AWOL on that score. What will the European Union do vis-à-vis these frozen assets?
Right.
I'm a Frenchman. I've been arguing this cause in Paris with very little success, I hasten to add. Financial rectitude is very high in Paris these days, sort of bizarrely. And in this case, unfortunately.
Very good.
So what are you, as the representative of the European institutions, going to do about this?
Thank you. You have a bunch of questions, so why don't we start with you?
So first, China. We haven't forgotten about this. And actually, the last sanctions package, we had again also Chinese companies there sanctioned, and before that as well, because they are helping this. And I agree with you that it's actually intensifying and you know, at the same time we have this trade war going on that also blurs the picture, and then we have a lot of voices also within Europe that, you know, we should somehow turn to China more, because US is not there. And we should, you know, cooperate with them more. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that, you know, in NATO we have said, and in Europe we have said that China is the key enabler of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and it is intensifying in this respect. And all this, you know, addressing the Chinese that please don't do this if you want to have trade with Europe. These are not heard because we are not taking action in this regard. But it is, I mean, we have those discussions coming up again. We haven't forgotten about this, but at the same time, there are very divergent views. Whether, you know, there are some people, I think, also in America, but also in Europe, that think that, you know, somehow decoupling Russia from China or China from Russia is possible if you know. But I don't think this is true. Especially the Chinese are playing the long game, and like I said, the changes not foreseen in 100 years are led by us together. It's changes in the international order. We have to keep this in mind. And then. When it comes to your question, first I want to address the danger from within, and there it is the democracy being a collateral damage that actually also is really affecting all our countries. There is a totally different point that I want to make. We need to work on the election observation methodology, because it's not fit for the digital age. It doesn't take into account what is going on there. And plus, we need to also see that, you know, in the future, some time we're going to have elections in Ukraine, and if they are done, you know, from the OSCE, where Russia is a member, then it's getting more complicated. We have to, you know, create new structures. But that wasn't your question. Your question was about the coalition of the willing and how to, bridge the gap there. I think what we have seen with the coalition of the willing. That we speak in support of Ukraine and talking about the security guarantees. That also it started from a small group, and, you know, countries are really getting onto it. It is not the substitute, but because European Union does not have a military, then it's clear that it's all the member states that have to agree on the use of military. And when it comes to the security guarantees on the European level, we can still do things together. We have the missions. We have the biggest training mission. We can, and we will have the discussions how to change that mandate, whether to take it to Ukraine to closer to the needs and all this. So I think there is a bridge there, and we can build on this coalition of the willing also to go further. But saying that, we also are very intensively working on our decision-making processes, because you know, we also need to show that we can do this if somebody obstructs. Because if we don't do this now, then we have the new mushrooms, you know, raising, and then it's going to be more harder. It's going to be much more harder then. So we really need to address this now. And there, I'm not sure, and we need to work on this, that everybody sees the urgency the same way right now. Because, you know, again, if we get to a decision where 27 is on board, then we sort of like, whew, you know, we survived. We are able to do this, but we need to think ahead of the curve, really, because we see these things coming.
The Q word. The Q word.
Yeah.
Qualified.
Yeah.
majority voted.
Well, but yeah, how to use it is one thing. Then the trust issue. The defense spending, I'm totally with you. I mean, at the same time, we come out with these proposals, which is really concentrating on boosting the defense industry of Europe, and then the US is like, wait, no, this is not what we meant. We actually meant that, you know, you do more, but you still buy American, right? So how did that go wrong? But I think, you know, talking to the Americans, even before we came out with this, we were saying, you know, remember the times when, you know, Ukraine was given the defense tools, but they said, no, you can't use them the way you want to use them. So many member states who are having this, you know, real threat in mind was like, okay, if we are in trouble, we can't rely on outside, you know, producers who will say that, you know, I give you these weapons, but you can't use them like you plan to use them. And that, you know, already gave the idea that, you know, we need to do more. But when it comes to trust, of course, you know, it's like a vase. You broke the vase and you can glue it up together. It's not the same vase. So we need to really keep this in mind. I mean, we are in this acceptance phase, and we are changing, you know, the way we work. And on frozen assets, you know my position on that. We have been talking about that as well. We need the 27 on board. So what are we doing? We are also having because so far it has been those who have been pro, those who have been against. I'm a lawyer by profession, so I was paid for solutions, not to say no. So of course there are risks. There are risks in every, but we also need to think ahead again. So let's work on the you know, mitigating those risks that we have, and that is what we are doing. But I must say it is very, very difficult because you know, different issues, but different opinions in different member states. But I think, again, we need to think ahead. We can't possibly imagine that Russia hasn't paid the reparations or the damages that they have caused in Ukraine, and we are just giving back what we have already. I mean, we have, in Estonia, we have a saying that better a small bird in your hand than a big bird on the roof. So the small bird is in our hand. Let's not let it go. Thank you.
Good.
Jack wants to add something.
On the point about China supplying Russia, so about 70% of Russia's machine tooling, including in its defense industry, is currently provided by China. And the question is, well, some people say we can't really go after that because these are Chinese products. But when you start breaking down those machine tools and see the components inside them, a lot of them have significant exposure and dependencies inside Europe.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that could be done.
And the US.
And the US. And then the question is, why are we not doing it? And the answer is because they can really punch back, right? And they can punch back in areas that make us very uncomfortable. Everyone and their dog seems to be trying to market a drone these days. And one of the most interesting questions to ask someone when they show you their latest drone is, where did you get the brushless motor from, the electric motor? And if you're lucky, you'll get a company that's in a European country or in the US. But then if you ask, well, where did that company get the magnets for the brushless motor from? And the answer will invariably be China. And I'm not condoning the US rhetoric on Greenland whatsoever, but the answer to the question of where those magnets came from answers the question of what is the US concerned about, which is leading them to talk about Greenland, right? And so the irony here is that we're not prepared to take action because we're worried that the China reacts and cuts us off from things. But we've just heard the intelligence assessment, the timelines, the concerns that we have about where things are going with China. Why are we prepared to maintain our exposure? That's a critical question. And so that comes back to, I think, the point about trust. It's very ironic that we're having a conversation about how much we trust the US, and yet we seem quite comfortable with a significant proportion of our military supply chains being heavily exposed to China. Another area where that's the case is explosives, right? We could be doing an awful lot. It's interesting how much has been invested into the ability to fill shells, factory for filling shells, much less into what you actually fill the shells with. And the result in Ukraine right now, and it would be worse for us if we had to fight, is that the Ukrainian artillery is massively underperforming, that we're donating at very great cost. Why? Because Ukrainian artillery personnel have enough rounds, but they don't have enough charges. And so their range is very short, unless they want to use all their charges for a few shots. And as a result, they have to get close. They have to get close, therefore they get killed, right? So our failure to invest up the supply chain early is costing Ukrainian lives now and reducing the effectiveness of the equipment we provide. And this is where we need to really understand our exposure, where we invest, and how we make sure that we're secure.
And how regulations and banking laws get in the way of producing just what you think
Absolutely.
we should do. Let's try to take another quick round because we don't have so much time. I have to let the former president have his say. You need a microphone.
Just very quick questions, and because the motto is going forward, it's going to be about the future. 4 things that the EU could do, or where are they? One is implement the Draghi report, which underlies any kind of technological progress. Otherwise, we are going to be nothing in compared to the United States. Is there any chance of implementing it? Secondly, is the EU going to deal with the massive amount of gray zone threats and or whatever hybrid warfare that we have seen, especially in Northern Europe in the last couple of years, but especially most recently, where the EU doesn't really have an answer, but unfortunately neither does NATO. Article 7 on Hungary. We wouldn't have this problem, with a lot of these problems with coalitions of the willing if we actually implemented Article 7, which in fact where Hungary is today compared to where Austria was 20 years ago, where basically Austria lost its vote for things that are nothing compared to what Hungary is doing today, and in violation of EU principles and so forth. And finally, just a little idea. Would it be possible to, in fact, change at an EU level immigration laws to allow the thousands and thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of Americans who would like to live in a place that is democratic and to enable US citizens to come to Europe and live, I'm looking at you, Steve, and getting a living and work permit in Europe because of the situation in the US. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Steve, can we ask Kaja to respond rather than enforcing another marathon?
Well, let's get a couple more questions. Yes, please.
It's going to be the same thing.
Thank you. Sabine Fischer from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin. Germany has been conspicuously absent from many of the debates that you just touched upon. Now there is a new German government, so I have a very short question. What would you like to see, and what do you expect to see from Germany in the coming months and years? So this is maybe not the German question, but the Germany question asked by a German, and it goes to whoever wants to engage with it.
Right. Short question, long answer. But
Can I take the German question?
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
I think what German governments, successive governments, both with Zeiten and also this government, have done with regard to the defense spending, commitment to defense and commitment to NATO is unprecedented, and it's very welcome. It's leadership, and that is what is required in Europe. And actually, they will have a tough time ahead like we all do. It's not easy. The cabinet debates about reallocation of resources, unless you want to tax more or lend more, those are tough debates. And especially, remember, Germany doesn't have nuclear weapons. So the US, UK, French spending is at a certain level for a reason. So for Germany, for all of us who only do conventional, it's going to be a lot of money going into defense. So doing it right, actually spending on what delivers, having the interoperability, having the timelines in place. And problem, Gabrielus, with the US purchasing for us currently is the timelines, the defense production capacity in the US. We are not getting what we wanted to get on time. And so, you know, it will be something that we really look forward Germany doing, that we expect from this government, leading by this example. But then also it relates to this sub-conventional warfare. Russia's warfare doctrine is one. It's preparations for the conventional war. So it's sub-conventional warfare. It's nothing hybrid about it. It involves variety of methods, and Jack and Rusi have done great research on that, how it was done in Ukraine. It involves influence, it involves corruption, it involves hack and leak, it involves cyber, it involves jamming. It's testing your systems, whether you are ready for conventional warfare or not. And that is what I think in Germany in particular, with various split internal security services, actually, I think that is one also area where it would be great for Germany to sort of lead, because pulling it all together, creating that awareness across the public-private sectors, critical infrastructure, and I include public and other media in that, is crucial. So there are quite a bit of work areas ahead of us all.
Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, I can take the questions that I had on Draghi report. I mean, everybody welcomed the Draghi report, everything that is in it, but of course it's not the report, but it's the implementation. And you know, we are moving in certain parts, but of course then it comes down to the details. So the work is ongoing. I mean, generally everybody says this is the thing that we want to and we have to do. And then on your second question on the gray zones, hybrid warfare, also was it last week or already 2 weeks before when we came out with the roadmap to phase out the energy, Russian energy totally, and it has a part of also the addressing the shadow fleet and also how we have to change so that you know, the countries can actually stop the shadow fleet. So we are dealing with that, and also in cooperation with NATO, because we have the Baltic Sentry for this, and we still, I mean, see them testing all the time how far can they go. So we have to take it extremely seriously. Now on Article 7. You know very well, it's a member state decision, and you know, if you have friends, they have friends, and then it's harder. And the same is for immigration laws. It is member state competence. So I mean, migration is a big issue, and the rules, what we do together, what we don't do together. But I think one very substantial and important thing that we have issued on the European level is, I don't know, it has a fancy name as well, but the point is for the scientists. We have a program. Come here. Here you can. I mean, in Europe you can, you know, do your research. Nobody tells you, you know, what you have to do or what you have to really keep in mind. So you can do free research and, you know, come to Europe. So we have this program for the scientists to work here.
Anyone else?
Just on the grey zone.
German government as well. But yeah, no, only one very short thing. Yeah. What we need from Germany is leadership on the European level. Thank you.
But
just on the grey zone.
We also need manpower in the military. It's not just money. We need manpower. That's a big problem. Sorry, Jack.
No, not at all. On the grey zone activity, I think it's really important for us to understand, right, that from the Russian point of view, this war in Ukraine finished in September of 2022, roughly, if it were not for people in this room, okay? And so think about how much damage to the Russian military, to their prestige, to their country, they ascribe to be our fault. And the point is that the Russians are investing very heavily in grey zone operations. There were 2 more units that are going to be dedicated for essentially sabotage and attacks outside Ukraine. that were stood up this autumn, pretty large ones. And we've already seen extensive acts of sabotage and so on against the continent. This is going to continue, and it is going to expand, irrespective of what happens in Ukraine. And therefore, we need to be very, very vigilant and prepared for it. My Moldovan colleague said that he objected to Moldova being described as a grey zone. From the Russian point of view, Moldova is a grey zone, right? They've tried to topple the Moldovan government twice violently and once through other means since the invasion of Ukraine, and they're going to keep trying. But where I think my Moldovan colleague is quite right to object to Moldova being described as a grey zone by us is the implication that we're not, that we're different from Moldova in this. No, 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 no. From the Russian point of view, we are all targets. There are centers of special influence, which are coordinating committees, set up in the Kremlin, aligned against each of our countries. Right. And if we understand that, then we understand that we need to be very, very prepared for this threat.
And the target is to get influence at the highest possible level.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Either political, economic, and so on and so
Yeah,
forth.
it's not about influencing like voters individually. It is about stimulating and polarizing electorates in order to empower elites, and it is about elite capture. That is the methodology.
Okay, this is where we started with the question of what's safe and what isn't, and what we can protect. But one thing I would say, in just one sentence of conclusion, the complacency is gone, and people are awake, and the debate is underway, and things are being done. And I'm very encouraged, and I'm encouraged by this panel. So I would ask you to thank them, and then you can go have lunch.
And nothing finishes at the Hague summit. It's just one step. Thank you.